Hello, everybody. Welcome back to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
Ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles?
I am ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, and not just any fantasy today, because today we are transitioning to your pick from Friends Pitching Fantasy. People following along on the arc of the show here know that we had recently read The Black Tongue Thief by Christopher Buehlman. That was my contribution to Friends Pitching Fantasy. And Dylan, you had pitched continuing to read a series that we had started a while back, beloved by fans all across the internet, and beloved by us as well. And I'm super excited to get back into it. I'm, of course, referring to the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee.
You are referring to the Greenbone
Saga
by Fonda Lee. And the whole time there, what a big reveal. And you probably are aware of that, listener, because you clicked an episode entitled Jade War by Fonda Lee episode discussion, or whatever you call these things, Charles.
This would be a book discussion.
It is we're not discussing the episode that we're making on it.
Well, sometimes
like
we do fantasy recommendations, which is more spoiler free. But when we do the deep dives, that's a book discussion.
Gotcha. Well, welcome to the book discussion.
Mm-hmm.
I'm your host, Dylan, and I'm here with my lifelong friend, Charles. And we're getting ready to we're getting ready to discuss this second book in the trilogy. And I think I'm just going to go ahead and give the spoiler warning.
Let's do it,
Charles, if that's cool.
Yeah.
We'll get into it. So, if you haven't yet read Jade City and Jade War, first two books of the Greenbone Saga, then you might want to turn this down in your headphones, because we're going to have a no-holds-barred conversation about it with spoilers, but we will not go beyond Jade City or Jade War, in part because neither of us have read the final book in the Greenbone Saga yet, Jade Legacy. So, just need those first two books under your belt, but if you haven't gotten them under your belt yet, now is a good time. Turn down your headphones and go go check out Jade War, because it's a good book.
Yes, absolutely. Go check out Jade War. You will not regret it. And check out Jade War as well. The first one's Jade City, and then check out Jade War.
We're killing it.
Yeah, we're doing both. So check them out. Highly recommend. This book came out back in 2019, actually, so not that long ago, relatively fresh, and we see it pop up on social media all the time. When we put up votes for a couple different series that we were pitching, thinking about reading next, this one did very well, swept, I believe. It won, at least. It was close, but it won by definitive win. Nominated for the Dragon Award for Best Fantasy, Aurora Award for Best Novel, Locus Award for Best Fantasy Novel. So, well-accredited series here, well-accredited book on its own. We had taken a break from it to read other series, and we always felt like we needed to come back and finish it, and I think that was something that a lot of fans said as well. It's like, you have to finish it, the ending's crazy, you got to read the whole story, and we've been meaning to get back to it for a long time, so I'm super excited to make the time to finish it. Of course, our next book will be Jade Legacy. We're going to read the whole thing, but we have a lot to talk about today before we can do that.
We definitely have a lot to talk about here, Charles. I think that it's interesting to follow up on all of those fans telling us that this whole series is a must-read versus because we've done all these other series where people don't get nearly as up in arms about if you only read the first book, you're not really getting the experience. It's even series that I always compare it to the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, where it's that whole series, every single book won the Hugo Award. And even that one, when we read the fifth season, like no one was like, whoa, like if you don't read the Obelisk Gate, like blah, blah. It's like people are kind of okay, and we will hopefully go back. I've read all 3 of those and they're fantastic, and hopefully we'll go back and read those at some point for the show.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something interesting about the Greenbone saga where people are just obsessed with this series as a whole. And Charles, I'm wondering, we can get into our experience with that a little bit here with like Jade War. How do we think it compared to Jade City? We were big fans. Did we feel like kind of like similar quality? Did we feel like it was an uptick, a downtick? Like where are we at with that?
Ooh, man, coming out of the gate with the big questions. I will say, yes, I was kind of surprised with the, unique fan feedback of read the whole series. Like the insistence of it, I feel like was kind of unique to this series. It's kind of that's rare feedback. So obviously super curious to see what that's all about. And Jade War to me does what a good, second book in a fantasy trilogy does, which it kind of expands on the world, expands on the characters, kind of grows your world more. And I think, Jade City was very kind of micro, and now we're getting the macro view of this world in Jade War. And that kind of parallels the main theme of this story too, which we can get into later, of like as technology expands and, they find themselves on the world stage and their borders kind of expand in terms of working outside of their country with other nations, how that kind of affects their very like traditionalist, isolationist kind of views and culture. So the contrast and conflict of those two kind of guides the whole part of this book. So I appreciated Jade War for that. Do I consider it required reading? I think I need to get the whole picture before I can say yes or no. I feel like the amount that fans were telling us we had to read this, I was promised a sort of a time skip also, which I feel slightly cheated on as well. Like we got a few years into the future, but I'm wondering if all that kind of takes place in Jade Legacy. I don't know. But it does feel like we're growing with these characters and expanding them. But I think the thing that grew the most was the like macroeconomics and policies of this world as we get to spend time in Espenia and other countries in this book. Shatarian, Kekanese, all these things, and the relationships with each other are growing and growing, and the way that these clans fight each other, it kind of changes too. So I think that's kind of the point of this book, and I guess to answer your question, I enjoyed it. I'm looking to see where it goes, and a very solid like middle book in a trilogy.
Yeah, so a big thing that I always think about is that sophomore slump with a second book in a trilogy, and I would say that this does not suffer from that in any way. I think it keeps things rolling from Jade City at a similar level. I feel like you, I have to see where things go in Jade Legacy, get the full picture before really commenting too much on like what is it that's making this series one where people get up in arms about like you have to read all 3 and you have to read them really soon, back to back to back. It's like, all right, let's see where that goes, but it certainly doesn't have that sophomore slump that you get from a lot of series. I don't know if it's like God, what is it? Empire Strikes Back, right? That's episode 5.
Well, a lot of people
correct, Charles?
consider that to be the best movie.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to say. It's
I thought you were saying that was a
Empire
slump. I was
Strikes
like,
Back
no.
That's the go-to when people are trying to say when like a second in a series of something is the strongest. I would not say that it's like that feel where I'm like, whoa, like this is the one, because I think maybe I like Jade City a little bit better, but certainly a strong installment that keeps the momentum going, and maybe this is where a lot of the feedback comes from. It feels very much like an extension of Jade City, maybe even more so than you usually get with a second book in the series.
Right.
Like, I don't know. It feels like the same book. Like I remember, Charles, you said you read the first Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie originally as like one of this big like omnibus edition like was on your at that time Kindle. We all know
Yes.
Charles has moved away from the Kindle
I'm on the
as his
Kobo,
e-reader.
baby. The Rakuten Kobo
Yes,
off the grid
right.
of Amazon.
Yeah, so Charles read this giant, I mean, that must have been like 2,000 pages of a Kindle omnibus edition for the First Law trilogy. And he
Mhm.
kind of said, like, at first, you've reread since, and now you have a better
Yeah.
idea what's in what book. But at first, you were like, I can't even differentiate between like which is what
Right.
book
And I remember
because
on the
I read
reread, I
it
was
in
being
that
like, "That's
format.
it for book one. That's where it ends." So it's like,
Yeah,
you know, it's
right.
kind of interesting how you kind of can dice up a trilogy. Yeah.
Yeah, but I felt like this is one that would lend itself well to just kind of continuing through in almost an omnibus
Hmm.
edition like that. I think, yeah, because doesn't it? I don't know. There's certain books that I feel like, th- I mean, maybe it's just like length, but the first thing that I think of is like the Stormlight Archive. Like, there's very clear differences also in those, like, Way of Kings kind of fleshes out the background of one character
Right.
in a
Each
certain
character kind
way
of
with the
takes a
flashbacks, and
focus.
then
Yeah.
book two. Yeah, it's like, it doesn't, obviously, it feels like there's book one in the, like, in that long series by Brandon Sanderson. There's book one, and this is the kind of the way it is. And there's book two, and it takes a different route. And these are kind of the themes of this book, and this is how we're fleshing out a different character as our focus in this book. It's like a lot of series do that or go a totally like different direction. And I don't think this series goes a totally different direction. It really is what you were talking about, where it's like, all right, now we're just like expanding things and moving things out, but it's all very much building on the previous book and the previous
Yeah.
themes. It's not like this new book has this totally different themes. We're even like, to go another Sanderson book, like Mistborn book one, Mistborn book two, let's say, like two very
Yeah.
complete
It
stories with
doesn't
like
take
different
on
themes,
like
I feel
that
like.
many new POVs. Like you get the new is it the hand, right? And then you get the new fist. Like you get some of those POVs a little bit. You kind of see some of that, but it's really a lot of the same cast. And
Yeah.
that's I think Fonda Lee just has so like what makes this like a good sequel is she has so many ideas, right, for this world and these characters and what's going to happen to them, and like the whole how these struggles kind of grow and expand, that this is what the second book does. It kind of is the growth of her ideas. It enriches this world, and I think that's something that a powerful second book can do. And I would agree that it feels like we're growing with these characters, and their problems are growing, and the scale of their influence is growing, and the stakes are kind of ebbing and flowing. Like they'll clash with Aitmata, and then there'll be like a cooldown period, and then they'll clash again, but instead of in a fight, it's in the headlines. They make that point a few times. So it's a story that feels almost like, um how do you say, it's not operatic, but it's one of those things where it just keeps it grows and grows. It's not like there's one story and this is the like the beginning and this is the end. It's no, it's this growing world that we're a part of. Like it's just continuing to expand. And certainly, yes, there is a clearly defined story in here, but like the overarching story, it is still growing at a steady pace, and it's gonna go well into the third book, it feels like, because there's still so much going on with this greater conflict with the Mountain Clan that still needs to be resolved, that I feel like we've barely gotten into in Jade War, while still getting a ton of narrative and conflict within the book itself.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Charles. And you mentioned Fonda Lee's ideas and
Mhm.
how they're expanding. I think that's the biggest strength. I feel like you'll agree on that. Like the biggest strength that Fonda Lee has as a writer is she comes up with very like brilliant ideas and like explores them in a way that I think few other authors really do. Like even just the idea of Jade and how it is going to influence the like every aspect of the world and the economy, and how like certain cultures like have it like right, the Kekanese, they have this very like built-in system around Jade with its like association with strength and honor and what it means to
Hmm.
be green and all that kind of
For
stuff.
sure.
But then you go somewhere else like Espenia, and it's like they have all of these laws and rules in place around almost God, what's the word for it? Like keeping Jade under control and ensuring
Oh,
that it's used for the what is
regulated.
it like regulated.
Regulated.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, there's all these. Yeah,
Or
it's
straight up
regulated
banned in
so
Hispania.
heavily. Yeah, or at least like because you can come and you can get like with certain paperwork and permissions you can come in and you can
Hmm.
temporarily wear your jade, but at the same time it's it is pretty much
Hmm.
outlawed, and it's just seen as something that you could like divvy up evenly to all of your soldiers and that kind of
Right.
stuff, rather than something that like is deeply in the tradition of these people and what it means. There's that whole honor system around it, and I think that it's just cool seeing her flesh out those cultures, and you get this kind of like Andon gets this culture shock when he heads over there, and but he also is able to find people who have Kekanese background, but they're also like different in their own way,
Right. Right.
having grown up in Hispania. It's
Hmm.
like all of these things are you don't really get to spend time fleshing out like culture and how like the main resource affects different cultures and that kind of stuff in the way that we get to in a book like Jade War. You don't get that in a lot of fantasy books because you've really either they're focused on like other aspects of world building,
Right.
like just so much focus on like let's flesh out all of these like ancient stories and lore, and we get some of that in the interludes, of course, but I kind of like that they're mostly confined to that. Like there's
Hmm.
not this she does the interlude, she's just like, all right, I'm gonna tell them some legend in this
Right. Right.
interlude, and it's like I appreciate that they're confined to
Yeah.
that rather than
Right.
like shoehorning them into like, because that's so annoying when you have like conversations between characters and it's like, you remember the story of the ancient tortoise of blah blah blah, and it's
Yeah. Right.
like,
Right.
of
Right.
course, but I'd love to hear it again. It's like, oh great. Like it's so
Right.
forced, while Fonda Lee is just
Right.
like, all right, let me just tell them what I need to tell them in these interludes. But anyway,
Right.
besides that, you get like you don't get these characters wasting time with telling each other things they already know about ancient lore. You get this like, how is this like main resource, this thing that's this like central aspect of the magic system, all that, how is that going to affect all these different cultures, and how is it weaved into the society and not just individually as a magic system? And going back to Brandon Sanderson, he has those like rules of what makes a great magic system, and he one of them is this like depth over breadth idea, where it's like it's much more interesting to go into all the ramifications and all the aspects of how one magic system affects the world, and than it is to like, oh, and there's also this other magic system and this one does this and that's so cool because blah. It's like no one cares. It's like like tell us this is like a crazy material that can do all sorts of things that aren't possible in our world. So it makes sense that it's like revolutionized every society in its own
Mm.
way.
Right.
I like
And
that. Yeah.
and yeah, Fonda Lee's world building. It's true. I think a lot of people, especially around the conversation of Jade Ward, go on about how it expands the world and this and that, and like we get to learn more. And I agree completely. But I think it highlights Fonda Lee's adept skill at taking, you know, inspirations from settings and mannerisms and cultures that we're already very familiar with and creating something wholly unique. Like, yes, she pulls from like organized crime stories. She pulls from this kind of isolationist society in Japan or something like that. She pulls in like World War II conflicts, immigration conflicts, like things that we're all very familiar with, and a time period in that where like borders are opening up and the news is becoming more important as the world stage for conflict versus like actual two people duking it out. Like we can understand all of those things pretty intuitively through just our history lessons and through like learning about other cultures and histories and stuff. But Fonda Lee is able to recognize a lot of these elements and pull on these unique aspects of them and work them not only into the world but into the themes as well. And that's what I think makes Jade War something more than just, oh, she took book one and expanded on it. Like she's also working on these themes of isolationism and whether it's a pro or con. Like, is it more progressive to like work with other nations and grow together, or is there something about maintaining your cultural identity that you should be prioritizing? And then you look at the smaller levels with all these characters, they're all kind of doing their own micro versions of that, where Hilo's trying to find his identity, and you have Andon, I think, as well, obviously spending a lot of time in Hispania. So you get this idea of tradition versus modern society, and Fonda Lee is just able to take all these very common elements that could very easily have just been like an uninspired retelling of like a post World War II society, but she manages to create something that like has captivated a large audience and is most importantly like super entertaining. I think being able to recognize some of these elements and see how they go into like, oh, how this affects the No Peak clan and the Mountain clan and Hispania versus, you know, K-Con, and it allows it to get more complex, and we're able to start with that kind of strong foundation of understanding from these elements that she's pulling in, and it's a like to make that feel like something like wholly original and engaging and interesting and entertaining is a really hard and impressive skill that Fonda Lee is showing off in full force in Jade War.
Definitely, Charles. I think that it's cool how she's able to explore all those themes, but keeping them very grounded in the characters. I think that it's like every character kind of has their own like aspect to them that they either have to suppress or they have to like hide, all this kind of stuff. Even so, you think of a character like Shay, who has that previous affair with a Spanian, and she just gets torn apart in the media,
the court of public opinion.
Yeah, the court of public opinion for doing that. And then you think of someone like her temporarily her lover, Morrow, rest in peace.
R.I.P. Morrow.
Has to
too good for this world.
Hide. Was he? Was Morrow too good for this world?
I mean, he didn't really do anything wrong except maybe get involved with the highest level of an organized crime family. Like, I don't know. But yeah,
I'm gonna count that as not being too good for this world. But it is interesting though how I like that by Fonda Lee. Like, I think that the plotting around that relationship, it went a very different direction than I was expecting. And I also think that it was kind of, I think we should talk about like the abortion, not scene necessarily, but like the plot I don't want to call it plot device because that has kind of a negative connotation, but like the event of her getting that abortion, because I think that it's interesting because I feel like most writers for something like that would do a lot more like almost heavy-handed building toward it, where it's like people would have been like coming up to her all the time and would have been like, Shay, like, when are you going to have a child? You should really have a child. And then she would be like, I don't think I could. Like, now is not the time for me. And I don't know, blah, blah, right? Like, they would go through all this. And then
like, have something like Wen putting a newborn baby in her arms or something, right? While she's deciding if she's having an abortion or not.
Right. But I even mean leading up to her getting pregnant, I think there would be like previous stuff of people like talking to her about that. And instead it kind of just like happens. And there's not even there's not even like a moment. Like Fonda Lee does have like these sex scenes, but there's not like this moment where you're like, like that might end up in her getting pregnant or anything. It just kind of happens, and I thought it was kind of interesting because I think that probably mirrors real life a lot
Oh yeah.
more than like it kind of. I think that is more people's experiences with ending up getting an abortion than would be like really even like having it too much on their radar before it happens. Like it
Right.
just kind of like happens that you end up pregnant and then you're like, oh crap, like I don't know if this is like this is gonna work for me or my situation or
Right.
whatever. And
Right.
then she just kind of goes and just does it,
Mm-hmm.
and it ends up being this like huge plot device that leads to like Morrow betraying her, all this kind of stuff. So I thought that was handled like for whatever my opinion on like handling the topic of abortion is worth. Like I thought that
Mm-hmm.
was handled well and
Mm-hmm.
in a way I haven't really seen before for a delicate topic.
I would agree, and I would even like expand that even more. And there's this, this theme of with progressions in technology and with progressions of open borders comes progressive ideas. And when you are in a society that has super like values tradition and family over everything and has been very isolationist, you run into these conflicts. So even when you have someone like Shay who is in a predominantly male role, it's kind of controversial that her as a female is even in that role. Uh, she then has to deal with all the BS that being a woman in that kind of position in this kind of society lends herself. Like she's getting smeared in the headlines for having a relationship with a man from another culture. And you wonder if that would be the same situation if she was a man and not a woman, if anyone would care. And then now you have
Well,
the
I mean, we have examples. We had like Lan, rest in peace. Also has like, didn't he have? Wasn't his wife from? Oh, she wasn't from another country. She like ran off with someone from another country. I'm trying to
she
remember.
definitely
Maybe
ran
I'm
off to another country, but
misspeaking.
I can't remember
Yeah,
if she was from another country or not. But like
yeah, I could be
it,
wrong on that.
it I think like the added there's definitely this element of we're talking about progression. This book opens with Coulson passing away, which you could kind of take as a metaphor for like the old ways dead and gone, that kind of mentality. And then you have Shay, who's just by nature of her being the weatherman is in a very progressive position, but she has to deal with being smeared in the headlines, getting kind of side-eyed by her subordinates or her lantern man or something like that. And then you have Aitmata knowingly manipulating that. And then to top it all off, now that she's got this pregnancy, it's like I can't face this in the public. This is something that is a uniquely, I appreciate it because it's an abortion obviously feels very like a modern conversation to be having in the world stage, both in our world and in the Fonda Lee's world here. But also it's this, again, another thing that basically Greenbone society is, and the society of the Mountain Clan is just not equipped to handle. It's like weathermen don't normally get pregnant out of wedlock because they're men and it doesn't matter. So she has to kind of fight that issue alone. And the consequences of that kind of go further, as you were describing, dealing with her relationship with what's his face, Morrow. But no, I liked it, and the fact that she had to deal with that, and this idea of again expanding on these, like how good are these traditionalist values, like where do we stand, is a complicated one, and abortion is just one of those topics that didn't get too heavy handed over the top, but it was addressed and dealt with, and I feel like it was up, like it lived up to Shay's character. Like of course she can't be having, like she can't be pregnant out of wedlock, go through all this craziness when she has so many responsibilities. And also she was just like, she's about to fight she's about to fight
Right.
Aitmata like in a duel to the death. So it's like, okay, I can't be pregnant and doing that, so it's the timing of it as well was an important thing, and I feel like it's a uniquely, as far as my opinion on what a feminine issue is in the world. Take it that for what it's worth, but it's like a very uniquely like female in society problem of like, great, it's like, as much as this is happening to me and this is like my issue, it's also like so many other people are like going to have opinions and issues and try and get involved when it's complicated. But it was dealt in a very direct way and an honest way, and loyal to Shay's character, which I admire about the whole thing.
Yeah, and I feel the same way about the decision to challenge Aitmata, right? These kind of things. I think Fonda Lee has that gift for having these plot events come up in a way that makes sense, doesn't feel like it's out of nowhere, but also doesn't have this heavy-handed way of building toward it. Like, and it allows her to move through the story, I think, quicker. Like, I could see in this is about a 600-page book. I could see in some folks' hands this ending up like 800 plus pages, and I don't think there's any need for it to be that long. I think that like Fonda Lee does a good job. Like, okay, here I need to have this battle between Shay and Aitmata. Was it like clean blades? Is that what she challenges her to?
Clean blade, yeah.
Clean blades duel.
Or I offer you a clean blade or something like that.
Yeah, either way, she challenges her, and it makes sense that she does that, both by Shay's character and by what's going on in the plot. But it took me by surprise, not as like a twist, but as just a like, oh well, like this is happening, and like this is happening pretty fast all of a sudden.
Right.
But it's cool because we get to like actually have a pretty like interesting action scene show up with big stakes. And
I was curious to see how their power levels, for lack of a better word, would match up, you know. But if I can be honest for a second, this was not Shay's book at all. She was taking L after L after L, and when she challenged Aitmata, I was like, you are going to lose. Like, this was not a good idea for you at all. Like, I get that you're kind of trying to
I thought the same
face.
thing, but then I was like, how is she going to live? Because there's no way this book is going to get down to just Hilo of the three siblings who we start out with. I'm like, we're not losing a sibling a book. There's no way. So I was like, so I almost, that's what made me be like, is she going to win? Because I'm like, she's not going to die, and this is to the death. But they kind of...
Yeah, I was like, she couldn't possibly win. Like, Aitmata, at this point, was built up like so high. And I thought Shay's decision to challenge for me, I would have never made that choice. And when she said she was going to do that, I was like, that is a mistake.
Charles, you would not challenge someone to an extremely powerful person to a duel to the death? That's shocking
unless I knew I was going to
I
win.
really thought you were the kind of guy. We thought you were the kind of guy to, fight people in duels to the death. But this
she just struggled the whole way with this one. She was getting totally like 4D chessed by Aitmata at every single move. She loses the duel. She loses her relationship. She like burns the bridge with Hilo, just like L after L after L. And and she like locks herself up in her room and is all depressed, and it takes Wen to come in and be like, I wish I could lock myself in my room all day, but I have to be strong for my kids. And it was like, oh snap, okay, like maybe I should get out there and do something. Wen had a fantastic book, I would say.
Kind of a brutal thing to say to someone who just got an abortion recently, but
I don't think Wen knew.
Yeah,
how could she have known? Right?
Didn't they like go together?
Did she?
Imagining that?
I thought it happened off camera there. I don't remember. Maybe she knew.
I kind of remember a conversation between them two where like Shay was saying something along the lines of, your mother, how could you approve of this? And then we end up with Wen being like, hey, everyone's got to make the choice that makes sense for them, and
Right.
like
But it's
during
interesting
this
to see
time.
Shay struggle the whole time, and I don't think we've seen her redemption yet or her resolve yet. I think she's still struggling, and I guess it will be into Jade Legacy where we see her, what happens, the consequences of all of this stuff, because she's kind of just barely holding on here by the end of this book, and she's suffered some pretty significant defeats in this book too, and she couldn't even, she even kind of botched the killing of her predecessor Doru, right? Like, she couldn't bring herself to kill Doru,
Yes,
and
I was gonna
Doru
bring that up.
killed
That's
himself,
another L.
which is another L. And then you have your master Luckbringer being like, "Oh, that was kind of lame. That's an L." He was like, because he was in the room, and he was like, "That was an L." So she's struggling, but she also has the card stacked against her, in being
What
in
do
like
they
a
say?
patriarchy.
What do the kids say in these days, Charles? It's like L and ratio or something like that.
Oh,
It's
L
like
plus ratio,
to
but
L plus ratio. That's what the Luckbringer said.
yeah, basically Aitmata's like
Like
giving her the L plus the ratio. She's like
L
defeating
plus
her, and
ratio.
then kind of a ratio is one like
And getting yeah, well, she lost the public in the court of public opinion. That's pretty much getting ratioed.
right,
It's
exactly.
ratioed on Twitter. It's like, and you get way more comments than likes. Yeah.
It's when your response to
So
another person gets more engagement than your initial thing, right? So it's like, oh, you got ratio, dude.
no,
Like,
no, it's ratio is it's likes to like comments. So it's like if you get a lot of likes but not a lot of comments, it means like people are approving of what you say. But if you get like almost no likes but
yes,
tons
but
of
you can
comments,
also
it's
get
because people
ratioed
are
if someone like Elon Musk posts a tweet and then someone comments with a joke, and then that comment gets more likes or something than Elon's initial tweet. It's called getting ratioed. You were just like, you were owned.
that's called getting ratioed too.
I think so. I mean, I'm not totally caught up with the
The
kids' lingos
original,
these days. My understanding is
the
you can
original, what
like, there's an
ratio meant.
additional level of owning someone when your response gets more engagement than like their posts. Like, oh, not only did I own you with the clever comeback, but it's also getting more response than yours ever did. So it's like it's second own. It's L plus ratio. That was my um, anyway, not
Oh,
important. We'll have to look that up later. I'm sure both are correct, or
we'll look it
maybe
up.
I don't. I'm not confident on mine. That's just what I assumed it
Well,
meant.
before people start saying L plus ratio, like I know from my Twitter use that ratio used to mean like you get more comments than you get likes on a post. But I don't know. Charles, you're up to date with all the
Hey, I
kids.
do
You've
not
kind of
claim
got
to
that
be
like
up to date.
Steve Buscemi holding the
How do you do,
skateboard
fellow
with the
kids?
backwards hat. Yeah, you've kind of got that kind of energy going for you.
But can
So
I share
I'll
another
trust you, and we
controversial
could.
opinion? I when I think about Aitmata from specifically just the actions that she's doing, like I am kind of I don't have anything necessarily against her. Like, yes, in the audiobook, she sounds like she's half snake, like she's speaking parcel tongue or something, like she's obviously evil. But when you look at her actions, like she's owning like the Mountain Clan constantly, and her views are rather progressive. Like she's opening borders, she's expanding business, like she's playing 4D chess. She's no more or less evil to me than our heroes in the story, and I'm of the opinion that she might actually be like, if I had to vote in a presidential election between Hilo and Aitmata, I think I would be highly tempted to vote Aitmata. Is that a controversial opinion? Because I feel like she's supposed to be our villain who murders family, but Hilo does the same flippin' thing in this. He murders his sister-in-law,
Yeah.
and steals a child, and lies about it. So like I'm like, they're the same, and Ait's just smarter, and a better policy, like foreign policy, and is more diplomatic and more clever, and more everything else. I'm actually liking Aitmata, except for the whole, she sounds like she's part snake,
Killing her
and all her
brother
descriptions too are funny. Like her narrative, it would be a good drinking game where it's like anytime Ida is like described like a snake, because it'll be like her serpent like motions and her she, you know, like that happens almost every time she's on camera. It's kind of funny. It's like, okay, I get it, she's snake like she's evil, but
Right.
when I look on paper her policies, I'm like, you know, she's doing a lot more for KCON than like the Mountain ever would have if it wasn't for trying to stay competitive. You know, that's just how I feel. Is that controversial, Dylan? What do you think? Am I evil?
Yeah. Well, you clearly would make a good campaign manager for Aitmata, but I think that's part of the book. I actually think that Fonda, I don't know, and maybe we'll get to have this conversation one day, but I think that Fonda would agree with you on like the idea that these characters are supposed to be morally gray. Hilo is an anti-hero, and I think that's confirmed when he kills his, like you were saying. I was going to bring up
that was
that moment
like
as well. Like
character,
it's like a holy crap,
moment.
like
yeah.
And even so, he has very little remorse for it. It's
doesn't
like
think about it at
he's
all.
kind of almost never thinks about it, and he also in the moment he's not even like, what have I done? He's like, geez, she never really knew how to like relate to me. She was always pushing my buttons, and like eventually she should have known that if she keeps speaking to me like that I was going to kill her.
Trying to keep my
it's
nephew
like it's
away
very
from me.
it's like right, it's like, and she was dishonoring me, and like she should have known that was coming. And he kind of just moves on with his life, and kind of everyone around him is like, they're vaguely aware, if not completely aware, that that's what happened. And
they all died in a fire.
They just kind of, they just kind of are like, okay, well, I guess we'll raise this kiddo, and we'll just act like nothing so bad happened. I'm interested if we do get that time skip in Jade Legacy, and maybe Nico's like a legit, late teenager or something like that. Like, he's gonna start wondering, like, hey, what did happen? You just kind of showed up and took me away, and my mom happened to die when you were there. Like, what's the deal with that? So there might be interesting consequences.
Because it is
down
interesting
the line,
that Hilo's own son is a Stone Eye too. So there's like that political grabbing kind of, like, if when you're looking at the who will inherit
Nico's
the throne,
the son
right?
of
Nico's the son of
who's
Lan,
the pillar,
right? Like, who's next?
I think it's got to be Nico.
Bloodline. It's got to be, right? Because as a Stone Eye, you can't be in the clan, it kind of. And it's interesting that Hilo's like,
there's also
uncle.
the daughter, though.
There's also the daughter. That's true.
Yeah. And it's also described as like he's trying to honor Lan, and I don't know. We'll see where the whole thing goes with
because
that.
Hilo
going back
that
to your
line,
original.
Right? You can go ahead and expand. Go back.
Yeah, I want to go back to the Aitmata stuff, because I do think that's interesting to get into. That I think I agree with you, and I think that Fonda would agree with you, that our quote unquote heroes are no better than their adversaries. They're just the people whose perspectives you happen to be in. And I think before Hilo did that kill your former sister-in-law move, I think you could say, all right, well, Aitmata like killed her family, and that's
she's like sociopathic, right?
Yeah, but now it's like, well, Hilo's doing the same crap, so
and I guess now
I kind of have trouble. It's splitting
which
hairs.
Is again the theme of this book, because Aitmata's very progressive, right? A woman in the highest form of power. She has to command respect by being progressive thinking and more brutal and more utilitarian, and she's very decisive. And I have to kill my brother, then so be it. If I have to expand borders, so be it. If I have to trade Jade and produce Shine, so be it. Like, she's a progressive thinker. And you have Hilo, who even in the beginning, when he wasn't in any, like, when he was just kind of the fist, or the hand, or I forget which one it is.
The fist.
The fist, thank you.
You got it.
When he was the fist, he was always like, he had a very special connection to family, and like and it was kind of endearing about him, right? Where he loved his sister no matter what. He loved Andon no matter what. He loved his wife no matter what. Even if sometimes it wasn't proper, he did have an occasional progressive moment, like marrying a Stone Eye and this and that, letting Andon, go to Hispania. Like he sees those things, but he also is still like he still has these elements of like, oh, I'm not a real Greenbone. Like he's still very pro isolationism. He still kind of thinks his race is superior and this and that. Like it's interesting to see the two different philosophies, and the question becomes like, oh, what does it mean to be a Greenbone? Like you're giving away our like identity. You'll never beat us because you don't understand these traditional values are strong, And I'm like, is that a good enough case to like go to war with Aitmata? I don't know. And like Hilo has to believe it because the Mountain Clan's whole power comes from that. So it's interesting to see if they're able to shake that off, or if they're able to use that fight and win and like be right. It's like where does that go? What is Fonda Lee trying to say about like the tradition versus progress? Our heroes are kind of stuck in tradition a little bit, and I don't know if we're trying to get them to shake that or if we're trying to get them to embrace that, like what the solution is, and we'll see. And like it's starting to seem like they're unwinding a little bit. Like Shay is just taking L, and then Hilo is becoming a little bit hypocritical, killing his own family. So where do you find that? I don't know. And that's what I'm curious to see, like where that theme takes us in the third and final book of the series. But yeah, I think that Hilo character kind of personifies the complication of where the clan is in history, trying to keep up with all this stuff, and just the nature of Ait being willing to keep up with it is putting their clan at a disadvantage.
That's well said, Charles. And you said earlier this idea of Hilo, it's like, oh, he's got all these positive things because he loves Andon no matter what. He loves his sister no matter what. It's like, well, he loves them no matter what, unless they go against his way of seeing the world, in which case he like hates them. Like not hates them, but he's very like he becomes very ambivalent about it because he does love them. I agree that he underneath the decisions that he'll make, like he basically exiled Andon, although that was
a good
Shay's
move,
idea.
I think.
He
had a target
he's
on his
also
back.
He only does it because Andon doesn't want to use Jade, right? There's multiple times where he's like, "Oh, put on Jade in a second, I have you back." So he kind of hides behind this, like, "Oh yeah, well Shay said it." It's like, yeah, but you make the decisions, and you made this decision because he's like not using Jade. And
right, but to be fair, also it's kind of hard to defend. Like he could defend himself if he had Jade, because he has this almost. I call it Gohan like power structure where he can do crazy things like sporadically. So it's like at least if Greenbones were after him, he could fight back. I think was his, and I agree, Dylan, that it's almost like in bad faith argument where he clearly just wants him to be more Greenbone, and so they can be a nice traditional Greenbone family. Like that's his number one motive. But it's under the guise of there's a target on your back, you can't defend yourself. I can't spend the resources to defend you myself, so unless you're going to wear Jade, you have to leave. It's in bad faith. I agree completely.
And also when his sister left, and it's again, like she's taken off the Jade and she's leaving. This was obviously before Jade City. She did that. Like, it's clear that he basically disowned her as a sister during that time period too. So it's like, he just has these very clear traditional values, and he does love them no matter what, because it's like that whole idea of the opposite of love is indifference, not hate, right? It's like when he starts to like hate them, he gets so angry with them. It's like, it's because he cares so much about them. Yeah. If you really didn't care, you would not have such strong feelings of hatred. Like that's really just your love being flipped around in a way that is distorted.
Mhm.
And he's an interesting, complex character because of those like really strong values that
Mm.
like help him justify some things that to us as outside observers are like, this is insane. This is
Mm.
completely out of control.
It's
And
true.
I think it's cool by Fonda Lee how she's able to use perspective to make you almost like it's easy to not take a step back and question, like, wait, is Aitmata actually any worse than the like our quote unquote heroes? And you make really great points. I can't confidently tell you that she's any worse or not, like that she's not even necessarily not better. Like she might actually just straight up be better because like Hilo's maybe more like feeling than she is. But if we're talking from like a consequentialist perspective, the things he ends up doing are just as bad, and at the same time the direction he's taking the country might be worse.
Right.
So it's like, I
But
don't know, who would I rather grab a drink with? Sure,
yeah,
Hilo.
yeah,
But
right.
who's better for the country? It might be Aitmata, and both of them do like reprehensible things.
Right. But and again, you mentioned perspective, which I think is something we kind of have underserved in terms of talking about Fondalee's writing ability, because it's true. There's many moments where Hilo is actually shown to be one of the people most capable of love and compassion and understanding for the people that he considers close, right? Like he's willing to give someone who, lost their arms a chance at, running a business and being successful.
Right.
He's willing to give certain people, like, he's always very understanding when he's giving orders. He'd be like, I know you're not liking the idea of my decision right now, but I want you to understand that yes, I'm your boss and this is what we're doing, but I'm also going to get that revenge for you or whatever it is, right? He's always looking out for people. And that's something that is rare in people that we want to like. And he's a very good father too. He's playing with the kids. He's very family oriented. So like there's a lot from his perspective that we can like about him and appreciate about him and see like the strength of those more traditional values. But at the same time, he'll do these occasional things that will shock you and surprise you, and he'll say things that you're like, that's kind of xenophobic, and all that stuff is going on with Hilo as well. But I think he's a cleverly written character, and the use of perspective is clever as well.
Right. You get the sense that someone like Aitmata in a similar situation to him, like trying to convince his former finger not to die by suicide, you get the sense that Aitmata in a similar situation would be like, yeah, sure, whatever. Like, I don't,
Right.
this does not bother
Can I
me
gain
that
anything from
if you're
this
going to die.
relationship?
Like,
Yeah.
right. It's kind of like, oh, no, I don't really see much to be gained. So,
It's like one
sure.
less mouth to feed.
And
Cool.
Hilo is, yeah, and Hilo is doing whatever he can to make sure that person both feels like they have autonomy and survives. And it works out so well for that individual person. And again, it's at an individual level, I do think Hilo has a lot more empathy and, like you said, compassion and
Mhm.
all of that. But it's like on the flip side, yeah, he is just so emotionally volatile that in a moment he could do something so
And that's
horrible.
part of that like organized crime trope, right? It's like the family pulls you back in and it makes you do things and it makes your relationships more complicated and it makes you like a violent person. And if you've seen like The Sopranos is a good example where it's like you like Tony Soprano, but then he goes off and does these evil things, and then you're like, okay, he's a charming charismatic guy with a family, but he's also torturing people, killing people, extorting people, and that kind of dichotomy um, is what makes that show great. And I kind of can see a bit of that in Hilo. Like he's there's a lot to like about him, and you kind of start with him, and he was always encouraging people to be better and do better, and he always had love for the family. And then I think you see like the effects of organized crime continue to grow. And this book ends actually with challenging, do we need organized crime in our country? Like, I don't think so. Very reasonable question to ask. It's like, why is our country being run by two different factions of organized crime instead of politicians? Which, what's the difference? Am I right? But
got him.
That's a little political commentary for you right there. But no, it's
Friends talking fantasy.
It's the way in which
entering the political
runs.
sphere.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and that's really high praise, Charles. I mean, you're evoking one of the most like beloved and compelling characters in TV history by saying Tony Soprano, and it's that complexity is definitely apparent in Hilo. It's cool to see,
and more so in this
him.
book too.
Yeah, he's so upset by the idea. It's interesting because I'm thinking back to this, like this idea of loving your family no matter what, and things along those lines. It's like it is present when you see something like his son ends up like almost dying because of consuming Jade, but then he's fine because he's a Stone Eyes. It's like he actually does not really care at all about the son being a Stone Eyes. He's just like, okay, but then he's going to be okay. And they're like, yeah. And he's almost even observing that the doctor is like sheepish about it. Because, so he's thinking like, oh my God, like, did something really bad happen? Like, is my kid going to be okay? He's like, where's my son? And like, oh, well, he's going to be a Stone Eye, but he's fine. And he's like, wait, what? Like, okay, so he's fine.
And he was even like, is there something wrong with being a Stone Eye? And the doctor's like, of course not. Of course not.
Right. Right. And of course that's like that's an area where he's probably had to do a lot of reflecting because of his wife, and he probably knew this was a legitimate possibility and all of that kind of stuff. And he's like, okay, and he takes that in stride, but it's like he's not gonna love his kid any less, I don't think, because of that. So it's like he has these weird moments with his family where he becomes like more progressive than the doctor who just delivered the child.
Right.
And
I kind of read it like maybe the doctor was afraid to tell the leader of the mountain clan that his heir
of course. But you get the sense that the doctor...
There's probably some prejudice there, too.
Thought there was something... Yes. And the society... I mean, even we can move it away from the doctor in particular. Who knows? Maybe that doctor is super progressive. But the point is the society at large is less progressive than Hilo was being in that moment around Stone Eyes. Like, there's most of the men in that society, like green-boned men in that society, if they have a Stone Eye child, they are going to be really pissed and probably like treat the child worse. And I do not think that's going to be the case with Hilo. So it's like, that's such a weird contrast to his, like the ways in which he's ridiculously traditionalist. And
the way he treats Wen,
it shows
it's like, I don't want her involved at all. Like, there's nothing she can really do. Like, she just get hurt, like that is a whole part of it too.
Yeah, but it all fits. Like, he doesn't feel unnatural when he has these contradictions, and I think that's a sign of strong character writing, when you can write a character that has these aspects of themselves that like you would not think go together at all, but like that's how people are. Like in real life, like people are not these two-dimensional, like I just stand for traditionalism and I'm going to be that character that represents this ideal in the book. Like, this isn't Animal Farm. Like, sorry, take that, Orwell. But
we're coming at everyone today.
Yeah, Orwell,
politicians, literature. Yeah, no one's safe. No one's safe on the Friends Talking.
No one's safe from Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. Yeah, so it's but I don't know. I'm just thinking of a book like that. Book is a short book where like like literally characters represent ideals in the sense that like this character represents the working class and these ideals. It's like, but this book we have characters I feel fully fleshed out in all of their contradictions in Jade War, and at the same time they don't like it doesn't make them feel unnatural for
even
holding,
as the
like,
conflictions
having those
escalate
dissonant
too,
beliefs.
because they certainly do in this
Right.
book as well.
And they cause dissonance, they cause tension between those beliefs. And I think we'll continue to see that, especially around Hilo as we move forward. And you mentioned this idea, like, what is the message of this book when our heroes are more isolationist and maybe more xenophobic than our villains, theoretically? And it is interesting to see, like, is this going to be like their downfall, that they refuse to adapt and adjust to the time into the times in the long run? Like, is Jade legacy going to end with, like, Hilo goes down for his traditionalism and his hubris or whatever, and maybe the next generation is going to do a better job, like find that balance between the kind of like forward thinking of an Aitmata with the compassion that Hilo can show in the better moments? Like, is a character like Nico, if we do get like pretty intense time skips, like is a character like Nico maybe going to be able to bridge that gap? Or who knows, our current character is going to come around to more progressive thinking? Who knows? There's a bunch of ways that this could go, and I think that's part of what has this this interesting heading into the final
And the
book.
conflict is good because I really don't see like this book taking a side yet. I mean, but the nature of the Mountain Clan being our heroes speaks to some of it, but it's still conflicting. And I want to transition and make sure that there's one more character that we have to talk about, and I am of course referring to Andon. We've talked a lot about Shay and Hilo and Aitmata, but we need to and even Wen to some extent, but we need to make sure that we talk about the Andon plotline, because it's actually a substantial part of this book. And the first book, Jade City, like my favorite scene in that book was at the end when Andon and Hilo confront each other, and Andon says, "I refuse to wear Jade." Large part being that he doesn't want to be a tool for murder, and the other part being, I don't want to be like my own mother who had the itches and killed herself. I don't want to be like that tragedy. And so I thought that was huge. And against someone like Hilo, who's like, to wear Jade is to be powerful and to be loved and to be part of the family, like, who better to say that to, right? And then kind of the falling out between them, especially when you consider Andon is like a prodigy with Jade and graduating top of his class in Jade City. So he's kind of like fallen off, and I love comparing him to Gohan. It's like when Gohan decided he was going to go into academia after defeating Cell. It's like, come on, man, you're like the most powerful Saiyan there is. Like, you got to keep training.
Right, he goes.
You're gonna
he
hit the
becomes
books
like
instead?
the Saiyaman or whatever, like the Great Saiyaman.
Right.
God, that was so funny.
And Vegeta just makes fun of him the whole time. It's like, oh, he chose to study instead of be a strong warrior. Like, pathetic. So that's kind of Andon's. But there's something noble in that, right? Because Andon sees the path that laid out before him if he takes Jade, of like just being a tool for killing and murder, and to be part of the family is to be part of being part of a crime syndicate and doing things that you're like are inherently evil, and Andon wants to walk away from that, like Shay had done previously. So you can understand that. It's like, who would necessarily wants to choose a life of having to look over your shoulder all the time, having to kill people, having to extort people? Because at the end of the day, as much as we like to look at these clans as being like political factions, they are organized crime families, and there's that important distinction there, and all the unsavory things that come from that you can't walk away from being from that. And Andon, to his best effort, is trying, but he kind of reverts in this book, and I'm curious to hear your take on this, because I was reading it, I'm like, Andon, at one point you refuse to wear Jade, and then on the other hand you forcefully insert yourself into family business in the second half of this book. And I thought that was kind of an interesting choice for Andon, and I'm curious, Dylan, to see your thoughts to hear your thoughts on the Andon arc.
For sure. I love the Gohan comparison, by the way, Charles.
Thank
I think
you.
I said that explicitly, but I actually, like, once you said that, I can't get it out of my head, like, how similar some of the plights are. And I love Gohan. He was like my favorite character.
Of course, he's awesome.
Although I love Vegeta too.
Who
Vegeta's
doesn't?
such good stuff.
Who doesn't love a good like bad to good arc in their anime?
Yeah, right.
Redemption arc, I should say.
But either, yeah. He's. I mean, part of what I like about Vegeta, we'll move away from him. Part of what I like about Vegeta is he's like always still flirting with actually still being a villain.
Yeah, right.
It's like he never really gets it out of his system when there's a lot of characters in books and anime or whatever else that like once they make that bad to good transition, they're like, well, now I'm a good guy, and like that's that. But Vegeta is always tempted by the dark side.
If these people
basically.
keep testing me, I'm gonna go evil.
Right. And he also just like, one of the number one things is he's always just wants to be stronger than Goku. So it's kind of like more important
Still
than being a
fueled
good
by
guy.
hate.
Yeah. So I don't know. Very true to himself. But anyway, yes, the Gohan comparisons are apt when it comes to Andin. And I think that, I think what it is, you know, you can. I'm trying to think of the best way to say it. Like, you can take the kid out of Jade City, but you can't take the Jade City out of the kid, right? Mm-hmm. It's like he's still got that Kekanese background. That's who he really is, and I think he's. Even when he goes to Espenia, he finds the Kekanese people in that city, and that's who he ends up really associating with. And he's like, oh, it's interesting how different like a role Jade plays in this society. But all that being said, he's still been like brought up in that culture, and besides like the physiological draw of Jade, like he still wants to be a respected member of the family. And I don't think that ever leaves him. Even when he's like at his most like, I'm just here in Espenia and I'm just studying, it's like he wants to go back. And
he
even
never
when
wanted
he's like
to go
in a
to
happy
Hispania
relationship, right? So it's not really like he's like, he hates the idea of Jade for the reasons that you discussed before, but it's so deeply entrenched in like how he sees the world and who he is. And he, in his perfect world, he would be this like high ranked, respected member of the No Peak clan.
Sure,
and at
potentially
the same
be
time,
the strongest fighter in all of K-pop.
Sure, he would love to be. I'm saying, but in his perfect world, he would just not use Jade, but also be like one of the leading figures in the No Peak clan. He just doesn't like Jade. Like everything else, you know what I'm saying? Right. Like everything else he wants. And it's...
Well, I also think he doesn't like violence.
I think he doesn't like violence, but he's getting involved in like an assassination plot.
Right.
So...
And he even, I love when he went to the pillar violence, in Hispania, right? And was like, I need you to kill this guy for me. And he was like, what? You're asking me to kill somebody and you refuse to wear Jade and you act all high and mighty and holier than thou. Oh, I'll never kill again. I'll never wear Jade. Meanwhile, you come to me and be like, kill somebody. As I thought that was like, Andy, you have some growing up to do, buddy. Like, that was not cool.
Yeah. And he's in his early 20s, I believe, by the end of the book. And that's over the course of years. He's literally like having his first ever relationship and first ever romantic and sexual experiences. It's like, of course he has a lot of growing up to do. And he's also got that like inner conflict going on. And especially... you want to like individuate at this time in your life, right? And I think Andin's doing that, and he eventually makes the choice at the end of this book that it's more important to try to save Wen than it is to continue his boycotting of the use of Jade. So I don't know. I think I'd be interested to see if Andin ends up kind of really getting back into Jade. I think that's kind of what the people are clamoring for. It's what I'm clamoring for. Just not for him as a like person that I want. Like, I don't think that's going to make him happy or go down a route that is good for him as a person, but as a character, I think that's been his conflict for the last two books. And I think for the final book, we have to see, okay, what does happen when Andon fully gives himself to Jade? And I'm just excited to see that from like character arc perspective, even if I know it's probably not going to go well for it.
Right. Because I, at the beginning of this book, when it became clear that Andon was going to be a big part of the story in this book, I was like, okay, this is ending. Andon's arc is ending with him picking up the Jade and doing something like miraculous with it. I thought he was going to fight somebody and like do a super cool, like, this isn't even my final form kind of defeating of somebody, but he ended up using it to...
You're very DBZ focused today,
This book
Charles.
puts me in the mood. This book puts me in the mood, and I don't know why.
Yeah.
But I guess because it's just like kind of the way they fight each other.
There is some this like power level type stuff.
They can
for
like
sure.
wear more
and
Jade
the go-on
and power up
comparison is
more,
good.
you know, and there's something about, and there's the strong characters in this opera like storytelling, just to see them kind of come together, and you're like, ooh, how would that matchup go? So there's something that invokes it in me. So that's what I was kind of expecting, but it kind of makes sense that he would go and use it to miraculously bring Wen back from near certain death, and it kind of speaks to his arc if he's trying to, again, create his own identity. And I think a large part of this is, as much as the world is expanding and growing and crossing borders, there is something important about culture and cultural identity and tradition. And I think that's something, not Hilo, Andon. That's something that Andon is missing when he goes to Hispania, and he longs to go back to K-Con, and he's trying to find, like, grab on to that identity in Hispania, and he sees some of the injustices that his people have to go through by being immigrants in a foreign country, and that kind of fuels his willingness to help. But there is a little bit of something about Andon where, I wouldn't be surprised if his arc goes like evil mode. I'd be curious to see that too.
Yeah.
Because I do see some of the warning signs.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, I think it's like a slippery slope thing. He's got this whole, all right, I'll go back to Janloon and I'll just be a guy that heals people with Jade. I'll use Jade only for good.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's no way we're going another, I don't know how long the next book is, but let's say it's 700 pages. We're not going another 700 pages with you just the whole time being like, look at me, I'm the good guy Jade doctor who just helps people with Jade. It's like,
I went to 4 years of medical school, my 2 years of residency, and now I'm an attending.
Right. He is gonna, I think it's gonna be a slippery slope, right? He's gonna be like, oh, wow, this is going great. And then it's gonna, because what we've seen with Andon is when push comes to shove, he is willing to make compromises. And that's what he did in that moment. And I think, right here at the end of the book, I think he has no regrets because he saved Wen, and that's great. But you keep giving an inch and giving an inch and giving an inch, and suddenly you're a mile down the road.
Especially in a family that promotes like extortion and violence.
Yes.
And,
So push is going to come to shove. He's not staying just a guy who helps people with Jade for an entire book with probably time skips. So I think he's going to go down a dark path at some point in Jade Legacy, and we'll see if he's able to wrap back around.
To continue my DBZ parallels, it would be interesting if it was like we get Maj and Andon, right? Where he breaks bad.
Right.
And just embraces the Jade and does all kinds of super cool like action scenes that he just like embraces the Jade and does some cool stuff, beating people up.
I feel like Fonda Lee's been very patient in her unfolding of the use of Jade, and
I'm waiting for that face-off.
Has to let someone go. Yes, I think in the final book, she has to really
Anakin versus Obi-Wan
throw all the cards down on the table. Yeah, I mean I think that it's
Vegeta
fun
moment.
when you build up toward it. Yes, like Goku versus Vegeta moment. I think get all the pieces out there on the board, and you gotta just make some of this stuff happen, because the possibility of what you can do with Jade is like pretty incredible. But I think she hasn't taken it to its like ultimate ends by any means. And I hope we get a really this isn't even her final form, Charles. Her final form is Jade Legacy. Although she's writing more, so
I know there is a prequel.
But you know what I'm saying? It's like there's so much. I mean, this is another Sanderson thing, which whenever we talk magic systems, it's hard not to talk about Brandon Sanderson, because he's become like synonymous with the hard magic system and all of these laws of magic. But he's talked about, like, I won't say what happens at the end of Mistborn, but he's talked about Mistborn. He's like, oh yeah, like I had all these like pieces at play, and I'm talking about the end of the whole trilogy. And he's like, and I hadn't yet done this, but I'm like, how can I not, before I end the trilogy, like find out what happens when, like, I can't say, but like when I just like allow this part to go full force. Yeah, exactly. So it's like, and he does, and it's such an epic moment, because it's like, oh wow, you really like saved this for after we've understood this magic system for like thousands of pages, and now it's like, oh wow, like this is really happening. And I think we need to get that moment in Jade Legacy. I really hope she gives it to us, because there's so much that she can still do, and I think Andon is the perfect character to allow that to happen, to like let him go full force, because he has that like that level of ability, like you described the Gohan idea, where it's like he's got possibly more potential than anyone else. It's just like, are you gonna ever unleash it? It's like he's gotta unleash it at some point. We gotta see it.
Exactly. And I'm be curious to see if and when that happens. I'm just looking for like a couple of them to get in one of those wide open landscapes and just duke it out like full force and just get that battle scene. I think that's partly why I'm thinking about DBZ all the time when I'm talking about this book, because like I want to see that so bad with these characters, and I have a feeling we're going to get there. We'll see. They seem to be like, oh, the world's kind of moved past clan to clan fighting, and now it's on the political stage and the media stage. And I'm like, yes, but at some point this is going to get personal, and you're going to have a showdown, and it's going to be, it's going to be that much more exciting. So we'll see if we ever get there. We have not read Jade Legacy yet, but that's kind of something that we're gearing towards. It'll be interesting to kind of revisit this conversation in like 2 weeks when we have read Jade Legacy. But only other thing I wanted to make sure that we mention before we call it a day, and we can do this rather quickly, is Barrow, who was one of my favorite characters in the first book. I like that he just kind of bookends stuff really? And like his inconsequential existence, yet somehow he manages to like trip into some of these huge deals, like getting a massive amount of S1N1, like taking Lon's Jade, like all of these things that he's doing, and he still kind of bookends this story. Fonda Lee had me a little convinced that he was gone, and I was like, well, this is kind of underwhelming that like this thing that's been like kind of bookending the whole series to this point like results in him just being betrayed, and that's the end. But no.
Yeah, that surprised me too, that she like I don't know. I was like, they can't actually kill him. Like, there's got to be more for him to do. And then she's like, oh, like Moot was thinking about how hard it was to kill Barrow, and then he twitched at the end. I was like, oh wow, is he really dead? Right. But then of course he's come on, you can't kill Barrow that easy.
Or gets buried alive. Yeah,
Moot got wrecked.
Moot got wrecked, and then you're like, that's how that whole thing ends. Like they both die, and that's it. They move on.
Yeah, it almost feels like oh, did you just like feel like these were loose ends to just kind of like tie up? But no, there's more. Barrow doesn't go down that easy. It is funny though, because then Moot gets mistaken for basically Barrow,
right?
Like.
And so they drop like, that investigation.
Right. They're like, oh, great. And then Barrow shows up again, and Hilo's like, if I told you if I ever saw you again, I would kill you. And Barrow's like, oh, God. Like, oh. And then that's the exact dialogue. And then Hilo's like, uncanny. Well, guess I can't do that, though. Yes.
Right,
He was
right.
like, guess I can't do that. Is now like you can be helpful. And then of course Barrow, who's just never up to anything good. He's always up to no good.
Yeah.
He's gonna join up with the resistance.
That's right. They're
apparently, to try
introducing
to.
a resistance, an anti clan resistance. Now that's a progressive
Yeah.
idea. So
I guess, yeah.
I'm curious to
But
see where Barrow
I guess they're trying to get there with violence.
yeah, where Barrow kind of stumbles into next. It's always kind of funny to be like, you have all these people working so hard at stuff, and then Barrow just like totally incompetent stumbles into something and is like, oh, I'll take this, and like keeps going. You know, he's kind of that like chaotic force that keeps these bookend moments kind of interesting and exciting. So I enjoy the antics of Barrow, and I'm looking forward to see like where he finds himself in the next book and how seriously this resistance is going to play into the future of K-Con. This idea of like overthrowing the families, you know, it's like, who knows? Seems pretty ambitious to me,
but I know
especially with one book left.
It does. Yes, and I know what the future of Friends Talking Fantasy holds for us, Charles.
Do you know?
We're going to have to, yeah, I do. We're going to have to head into Jade Legacy. So that's like going to be 2 weeks down the line, maybe, that we release that episode. But in the immediate future of Friends Talking Fantasy, I think we're going to have to hear some sweet, sweet outro music.
I think you're right. I think we need to get that sweet, sweet outro music pumping. Thank you all so much for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. If you like what you heard today, you want to support the show even further. If you want to talk about, would you vote for Aitmata? Would you vote for Hilo? Let us know over on social media. That's at the FTF Podcast on Instagram and the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end on Twitter. Now, Dylan, if they like what they heard today and they want to support the show even further than engaging with us over on social media, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast, which you can do on Spotify, where most of you are listening, by just clicking twice at the top of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast feed. You can also rate and or review over on Apple Podcasts, which is super kind when you do that. We always love reading those reviews, so keep on doing that if you can. But just listening is more than enough. Thank you so much for doing that.
Couldn't agree more, Dylan. You guys are awesome just for listening. More than enough. Thank you so, so much. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.